Breaking this morning. After years of starts and stops, the Biden administration throws its support behind a Dallas to Houston high-speed train.
We believe in this. Obviously, it has to turn into a more specific design and vision, but everything I've seen makes me very excited about this.
In studio, Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg. We ask him about the landowners in the path. And then, artificial intelligence will shape this year's election.
Propaganda is about dividing and conquering. It's about trying to get people to disagree.
We explore its impact and get answers from the top state lawmaker on the issue. That and more, just ahead.
This is Lone Star Politics from NBC5 and the Dallas Morning News.
From the impact of artificial intelligence to a major development in a story we've covered for years. This morning, we focus on the future. Good Sunday morning. I'm Prazan from NBC5.
And I'm Gromer, political writer with the Dallas Morning News. We start with Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg. For the first time, we hear his support for a bullet train between Dallas and Houston.
He came to Dallas earlier this week for a different project to unveil a $80 million investment. Through the Reconnecting Communities program, the money will go towards 4 projects creating new green spaces and walkways built over highways. One will expand what's already at Clyde Warren Park, then another one at I-30, on I-35E, and along Highway 5 in McKinney. It's from the bipartisan infrastructure law passed during the first year of the Biden administration. Secretary Buttigieg joins us in the studio to detail transportation plans for North Texas.
The symbolism is important, but what about the practical value as well? I mean, how?
Well, the way I think of it is the purpose of transportation is to connect. That's what roads and pathways and trails are all about. But the reality is sometimes transportation wound up dividing too. The railways or highways that went in through a neighborhood, often a neighborhood that didn't have the economic or political clout to try to change that project, and wound up cutting that neighborhood in two. The point is we can do something about that. You know, nobody in charge today is responsible for some of those decisions that were made in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, but we're all responsible for what we do next, and we can create value with, as you said, a practical benefit, as well as, I think, a benefit in terms of justice, just doing the right thing for these neighborhoods that have such an impact because of how transportation affected them.
I want your thoughts on a project that we've been covering for years here, a high-speed train from Dallas to Houston. Recently, it became a Amtrak project. Recently, it was named as part of the Corridor ID program, which I understand is kind of like a watch list for maybe future federal funding. Do you support that program?
I think there is enormous potential in this vision, and I'll tell you why. Just the way that the population is laid out in this part of Texas, where you have 2 major population centers that are a long drive or a very short flight away from each other, that's an excellent candidate for high-speed rail. We see that all over the world, but the U.S., frankly, has been behind other countries when it comes to high-speed rail. We're working to change that. Now, this is not something you can do overnight, but as you mentioned, we've added this to the Corridor ID programming, putting some of those early federal dollars in to help get the planning, really get it on the drawing board. And I've had conversations with Amtrak. They're very excited about the potential here, too.
So is it fair to say that you are supportive of the project?
We believe in this.
Okay.
Yeah. Look, obviously, it has to turn into a more specific design and vision, but everything I've seen makes me very excited about this.
2 similar programs, L.A. to Las Vegas and then L.A. to San Francisco, both got about $3 billion. What do you need to see from the project to get that kind of money here for this project?
Well, as you can imagine, it takes a lot to build a high-speed railway. It takes a lot to build any railway. The projects that you mentioned are further along in their development. The California north-south one is already under construction. The one that's going to run from Las Vegas to Southern California is exciting because it's a public-private partnership. You've got private investors backing that, but they couldn't get it done without a big federal commitment, too, so we're helping get that over the top. They're hoping to have that done in time for the Olympics in LA in 2028. And I really believe that the first time anybody somewhere in America sees true high-speed rail, there's going to be no going back, and people are going to want it all around the country. And I'll tell you, looking all around the country, one of the most interesting and promising projects to come next is that Texas Central Vision.
Biggest pushback from the project has come from the landowners in between Dallas and Houston. A court decision just gave the project eminent domain. Do you support using that on this project? And how do you think about eminent domain in general?
Anytime you're building anything, highway, railway, you name it, you've got to do right by the landowners who could be impacted. It's up to the project sponsor to do that. If there's a concern about their rights being violated, we will come in and make sure that everybody's rights are upheld. These are challenging things. It's part of what it takes to get something built. But I do think there's enormous promise in this vision.
Let's talk about bridges. I heard you say a couple of days ago the tragedy in Maryland. It's hard to do something about a ship hitting a bridge like that. I mean, it's going to come down. But there are bridges across the country. In Dallas, there are 5 bridges on the list of most vulnerable. What can be done, or what is being done to get those bridges up to standard?
Yeah, this is one of the biggest reasons why President Biden pushed so aggressively for an infrastructure package. Is one of the first things that this administration did. And the biggest category out of that entire infrastructure package in transportation is roads, highways, and bridges. We got far too many bridges and roads in this country that have slipped into poor condition, that are vulnerable for any number of reasons. And we've got to recognize not only do you just have to take care of wear and tear, but there are new and accelerating threats. We have to not just maintain our infrastructure, we got to make it more resilient for the future. And I think we're going to learn a lot of lessons out of what happened in Baltimore that will affect the next generation of how bridges are designed and built.
The city of Dallas has notoriously dangerous roads. Our investigative team here has kind of really shined the spotlight on that, on some of the problems in the city of Dallas. One of the projects, or one of the most dangerous roads, is MLK Boulevard. It just received $20 million from the federal government, or at least an announcement was made. The city transportation director said that he hasn't seen a firm signed agreement, and it says it usually takes about 2 years from that announcement in Washington, D.C. to be on the ground here in Dallas. Why does it take so long, and should it be taking that long?
Yeah, you mentioned 2 things I'm very focused on. One of them is shortening the time between an award announcement and a grant agreement. Look, of course, there are a lot of steps you got to go through. We're talking about federal taxpayer money. You got to make sure that it is set up in an accountable way. But we can't be waiting around, especially because projects get more expensive each passing day until you actually break ground. So I'm trying to compress the amount of time from the press release to the groundbreaking. The other reason this is so urgent is when it comes to traffic safety, we can't move quickly enough to have some of these design improvements. This is maybe the biggest transportation crisis that nobody talks about. Think about what we're doing in aviation after that plug door came out of that airplane. We are moving heaven and earth, contemplating our entire approach to oversight because an incident happened where somebody could have been badly hurt. Meanwhile, more than 100 people die every single day on America's roads. Now, we saw that rate go down by about 1% last year. That 1% alone represents about 400 lives. But clearly, we've got a long way to go as a country. And I applaud local leaders who are contemplating those better roadway designs that can help. It's why we're committing federal dollars.
I want to ask you about electric vehicles more and more on the road. Is the infrastructure in this country where it needs to be in terms of charging stations, whatever you need to make the experience pleasant for people who are buying and using those vehicles?
Well, here's what we're seeing. Every year, more Americans choose to go electric. And of course, we support that because we want to make sure America leads the way in this EV revolution. But you cannot run tomorrow's cars on today's grid. That means the electrical grid needs to be upgraded, and we need to get more chargers out there. Now, a lot of people in this region live in a single-family home, maybe with a garage. In that case, charging is relatively easy for you. You can just plug it into the wall. But if you're driving longer distances, or if you live in a multifamily dwelling and you don't just have a garage in your own house, you're going to need another solution. And that's why, through the President's infrastructure plan, we are funding every part of the country with about $7.5 billion to get those chargers built. The goal is 500,000 chargers by the end of this decade.
Secretary, thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
Social media forever changed politics in the mid-2000s. Will artificial intelligence have the same far-reaching impact? Many are worried what it may bring. I traveled to Austin to understand more.
The future is here, ready or not.
Embarrassing, reminds me.
This is not Tom Cruise, but a fake video of him built through artificial intelligence.
It's not in a public address, but...
This is not former President Obama, but a preview of the days ahead. Fake pictures of former President Trump and manipulated audio of President Biden are already online.
Without doing very much work at all, almost anyone can produce a piece of political propaganda that may be convincing to voters.
Zelly Martin is one of about 30 people working with the University of Texas's Propaganda Research Lab in Austin, collecting, analyzing, and publicizing examples of artificial intelligence impacting elections.
The bottom line, I think, very often is no one wants to be manipulated, right? So that's kind of like where we can find a common ground.
The team is led by Dr. Inga Trauthig and Dr. Sam Woolley. They're trying to avoid what happened nearly 20 years ago with the emergence of social media, vastly understudied until its world-changing impacts were already reality.
There was so much excitement about its democratic potential and not as much thought about how it might be used by authoritarian regimes and by people that were working to manipulate public opinion or stifle free speech.
The downsides.
The downsides, which are big, right?
Their team is monitoring how major companies like OpenAI, Microsoft, and Meta roll out their technology, aiming to bring accountability.
And I think personally for holding accountable actors that are involved in this, if it's private companies, so just by sitting down and explaining how some of the information manipulation is happening, on which platform, which tools, you just provide information that can be really helpful.
The beginnings of that idea are already in the works. Last month, the U.S. Department of Commerce released this report, calling on companies, local, state, and national lawmakers to, quote, expose problems and potential risks and to hold responsible entities to account. Department staff hopes the government will give guidance on best practices, require people to disclose when they're using AI, and keep legal liability so people can file lawsuits against bad actors.
You also can't steal people's identities in this country. You can't defame people. And those are laws that have existed. And so in some ways we treat it as if we need to reinvent the wheel with social media and create these new laws. Really, in my view, what we need to do is hold people accountable for the same laws we've always had, and but just do it online. One recent example, which worries this team, runs through North Texas. The New Hampshire Attorney General named an Arlington man and company behind the AI-generated robocalls of President Biden, falsely urging voters to stay home during the state's primary election.
Voting this Tuesday only enables the Republicans.
In a statement to NBC5, the AG's office had no comment because the investigation is ongoing.
Some of this innovation, for better or worse, is happening in our state, and so we need to think deeply about what that means for both Texas and for American democracy.
In Austin, the Texas House just created a select committee on AI to come up with changes in law in January 2025, when the legislative session begins. That comes after the 2024 presidential election, when artificial intelligence may play a key role in the outcome.
State Representative Giovanni Capriglione joins us this morning. He represents Southlake and is chair of the new Select Committee on AI in the Texas House. He's also the co-chair of the State Advisory Board on the issue. Thanks for being here this morning.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Let's continue the conversation about elections first. Yep. So you're a Republican, somebody creates a video of you saying Donald Trump is terrible and I'm voting for Joe Biden and spreads it around the internet. Sure. Should that be legal to do?
No, I mean, in fact, just any time there's a major technological risk advance, there's risks that come with it. And so obviously with elections is some of the things that we're worried about. Deep fakes, changing people's audios, even just creating new tweets and all that kind of stuff is a potential risk to not just the candidates, but also to the voters themselves.
And the question would be, though, how do you even stop it? Especially in a situation where it would take so long to unravel that it could do damage before an election.
Yeah, I mean, what we're going to have to do is obviously first create laws that go and let people know that there's risk if they go, and there's actual punitive fines or criminal penalties if they do that, and so that helps. That also then goes to the providers, right? People that distribute that content, whether it's the social media companies or whether it's the email providers. They need to know that there are certain things that they shouldn't be allowed to transmit or distribute.
There used to be a time when all you had to worry about was that last-minute mailer, mysterious mailer coming like on the eve of Election Day or something. But now it's much more complex than that, right?
And the complexity is because it can be custom tailored and it can seem so real. We've all seen those Nigerian email things, and they see the typos and the spelling. But now we're at the level where someone can look at your social media profile, they can see who your friends are, and then they can even look to emulate their voices or their images. And so it'd be easier to convince you or to trick you as well. And it can happen, like you said, at the last minute.
Yeah. So your committee is going to be looking at legal penalties and maybe saying, giving them legal liability. So if this bad actor does this, you could get sued by a campaign or anybody.
That's right. We're looking at a whole host of different potential legislation. We have the advisory council that is going to be more focused on state agencies, for instance, and how AI is being used in government. But we're also going to be looking at private companies and rules and regulations for those. And those will come with potential penalties if they don't follow those rules, but also guardrails, right? I think all of us want this technology to succeed. It's incredibly innovative. We want this to happen in Texas, but at the same time, we want to mitigate those risks.
Yeah, there's also the positive side, right? Any thoughts on how AI could really work for Texas and work in terms of what you guys are doing?
Well, we had our first AI Advisory Council meeting, and we had 4 different state agencies talk about how it's already being used in our state agencies. So one example, for instance, is TxDOT is looking at, they did a pilot, they're doing a pilot where they're keeping cameras on at traffic. And they're using AI to say, okay, there's been an accident. Let's immediately deploy tow trucks or help or assistance over there. That's already reduced the amount of time that people are waiting, 5 to 10 minutes, right? So we see that. They're using it on more boring things, like taking care of their invoices. It used to take about 3 weeks to handle invoices at TxDOT, very manual. They've got it down to 26 seconds now. Probably a lot more accurate. So we see a lot of values on how it can be more efficient, how it can provide more benefits to more constituents without costing taxpayers more.
So how do you look at it from the spectrum of the robots are going to become self-aware and kill us all to a new age of peace and prosperity?
Yeah.
How are you feeling on it?
50-50. There's a lot of potential benefits, but I think if you look through history, there's always been these big technological changes. And I like to think about it when we first started doing the Manhattan Project and coming up with nuclear weapons. There's a lot of people afraid, right? And we were able to go and create rules and regulations, create new assemblies and bodies that could have those conversations, diplomacy and all of that. That has obviously not resulted in the negative part of it. We have an opportunity now to look at that and say, let's start making those rules now. Let's start having those conversations with stakeholders. We do want Texas to lead on this. We do want this technology to help people. It is going to save people's lives, right? I mean, just the advances in medicine that this will protect, and a way that you'll be able to save money in a lot of different things. But there are risks to privacy. I mean, this takes a lot of data and a lot of information to train these models. With that data comes a risk that there will be cyber breaches or that there are cybersecurity and cyber attacks on there. So we want to make sure that that's protected as well. And then, of course, we want to make sure that in those fully autonomous decisions that are made without any human intervention, that we make sure. It is. It is. I mean, and so one of the things that we're looking at is how do we do this in a way that we look at each case use as risky or not risky or riskier, right? And then make those rules conform to how risky that is. Obviously, when we're talking about weapon systems and we're talking about people's health care, those are riskier. We want to be more protecting of that. But chatbots, maybe for
there's a lot of good things that you want to encourage, but then stop the bad stuff.
That's right.
Come back to see us, Representative.
Yeah, thank you very much for being here.
All right. Appreciate it. Thank you.
No labels is a no-go. Late last week, the bipartisan group working toward putting a third-party presidential ticket on the November 5th ballot said it had not identified a credible candidate, adding the responsible course of action is for us to stand down. The group's national convention chair and former Dallas Mayor Mike Rollins appeared on this show last month and said the group isn't going anywhere.
This movement's going to be here. Things are going to change in this country.
So how do you feel about President Joe Biden?
Yeah.
Why not just support him over Donald Trump and leave it at that?
Look, as you know, I was the first big city mayor in the United States to endorse Joe Biden because I believed he could beat Trump, and he did. I'm still a big fan. I'm sorry he's not going to win this time, and I'm scared about what's the alternative.
That's all the time we have. Stay tuned for Meet the Press with Kristen Welker.
Total eclipse tomorrow. Where are you watching?
The Garden Spot of North Texas, Ennis.
I'll be in Dallas, and we hope you all enjoyed the total eclipse, and we'll see you back here next Sunday for more Lone Star Politics.